Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. I don't know about you, but my weight is up, down, and everywhere. It's been a lifelong battle. And even though I don't feel like I've ever won it, I do feel like I'm healthy and on the right track at all times because I am one of those people who likes to exercise. But I am watching friends who have backburnered wellness for their entire lives starting to pay the price. They are losing mobility. They're having heart issues. They're on medicine for blood pressure and cholesterol and the number of other problems. And all of this could have been prevented. Our guest today knows plenty about wellness, health, and how to get out of your rut. Erin Risius has been helping people to live happier, healthier lives for over 25 years. She is a mental health and wellness professional specializing in health and feminist psychology, which explores the inner and outer influences on mental, emotional, and physical, social, and spiritual well-being. Her academic background, massive. She's got a bachelor's degree in kinesiology, which is your study of movement, and a master's degree in counseling psychology. And she is an experienced licensed professional counselor, wellness coach, speaker, and health educator. And the reason I know her is because I used to speak at Hilton Head Health, and she was the point person for therapy there. I have so much respect for you, Erin. Thank you so much for being with us today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
So when we're talking about people who need to get out of a wellness rut, what's the first thing you tell them that may help them to get moving?
Very good question. You know, when it comes to finding our own way through what feels like such a long and tedious maze, it's really about slowing down, tuning in to what's going to work for that person individually. There's no right or wrong. There's no fast way, but it's really about finding that person's way. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially in the diet industry. There's a lot of misinformation around there when it comes to movement and exercise and what's going to get quote unquote results. So what I tend to see is people want results yesterday, which is in the form of weight loss. You know, there's a sense of urgency and desperation of, oh my gosh, especially after the holidays, you know, there's that sense of indulgence that I got to undo the indulgence and I need to create results quickly. But what happens is that desperation and that urgency tends to propel us to the no pain, no gain exercise, the overly restrictive diets. So we tend to be all in with the approach because we're super motivated, super desperate. But what happens is we gravitate toward those approaches that really are destined to fail. And it's not that people are failing those approaches are failing them.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what happens is it's really about taking the reins back, taking the power back. Well, okay, what will work for me personally? And that becomes a process, and it's not a fast one, but it's the most rewarding. And it really is about creating that lifestyle approach to well-being.
You know, I like when you say that because you once said something to me that helped me quite a bit. And like I mentioned before, Erin was the therapist at Hilton Head Health, and she also did a lot of classes there. And we became friends. And one time we went to dinner, and she was asking me how my week was there because I was speaking and I was also doing the program. And Hilton Head Health is a great place to, you know, eat right, lose a few pounds, work out. You know, I lovingly call it the fat farm. And, but I went there and she says, well, what have you been doing for workouts? And I like to ride my bike and swim and all of this stuff. And meanwhile, they've got 50 different things going on from kickboxing to Pilates to, I mean, it's got everything. And I said, I don't really like going to those things. And she goes, oh, you don't like group fitness. And it was like suddenly I was released from the pressure to do it the way they say you have to do it, because that doesn't work for me. I like going solo with that. So when you say that these other programs that people latch onto are failing them, that's pretty powerful. Can you go a little deeper with that?
Yes. So I worked at 3 immersion wellness retreats. And so the last one was Hilton Head Health. And so at every one of those retreats, I would see people come in, again, super motivated. And typically their motivation, not for everybody, but most people, was to lose weight. And, these resorts have, like you just mentioned, a ton of fitness classes, a wide range, and it's really aimed to help people to find their fitness style. So a lot of group fitness, mindfulness activities, and then educational classes. But when it comes to the exercise part, often, like, for example, people would go to these classes that they normally would never want or choose to do at home. It's like, when in Rome, okay, so when in Hilton Head,
Right.
or in a structured house. So it becomes, well, while I'm here, I'm going to do this, but there's no way in heck I'm going to keep doing this when I go home. Already, that's a recipe for failure. So it's really about, I would teach a class right out of the gate at the beginning of the week of like, hey, what's your expectations? What do you like to do? Do you like group fitness or solo fitness? Do you like being outside in nature, or do you like being inside on a machine or in a class with other people? So it's really about tuning into what does someone like or not like, or at least tolerate. Sometimes people are like, I hate exercise. Don't even ask me to like it. But then it becomes, what can I tolerate? What feels good in my body? So that I'm not setting up a negative reinforcement to move it because of the pain that I might be feeling. So this is where there's a broad spectrum, and it's not about doing what everyone else is doing, what is going to get me results faster, what I should be doing, what the latest marketing is telling me to do. It's really about what do I know I like, or at least don't hate, that feels good in my body, that I probably will continue doing when I go home. And so this is even for those who aren't in immersion wellness, but you're considering starting something. It's like, what am I realistically going to continue doing? What is sustainable? Not a means to an end, but what is sustainable? And what, if we can get there for ourselves, what is actually enjoyable and pain-free? And again, I want to normalize, not everyone can get to the, I love this, I love moving. But I really do challenge folks that usually they can find something that is pleasurable, but it may move outside their realm of what they expected it to be. For example, I worked with a woman where she came into Hilton Head and she was a self-described, I hate exercise, I hate it. And at the end of the week, I'm like, usually I can find, something that someone found that they liked. And so at the end of the week, I asked her, I'm like, well, did you find an exercise that you liked? And she's like, nope, no, but I feel better. I feel better in my body. I feel less depressed, less anxious, all the things that come with movement. And I'm like, not one thing. And she's like, no, but it's okay. And I'm like, well, she's like, well, I loved Zumba, but that doesn't count. And she didn't think Zumba counted as exercise because she enjoyed it. And so I running, because I'm like, that counts, time out. So we sat down and looked up a gym in her hometown and found all these dance classes that she could try, even in addition to Zumba. And she's psyched out of her mind. She's like, this counts. She's like, but I was enjoying it. And I wasn't like gasping for breath. I'm like, but you're moving your body, And so it's really about tuning into what's going to work for that person, and really thinking outside of the box of what we're told it should be based on the marketing out there. The no pain, no gain exercise is really, for most people, not the way. For some it is, but for most people, it's not going to be their way, and it doesn't have to be. So.
Well, I think you raise a really great point with that story. What qualifies as exercise?
Well, and there's exercise, and then there's physical activity and activities of daily living. And so really the research shows this, is that, I come as working with people's mental health. I'm looking at what's going to help people to feel better. And the research shows about, 10 to 15 minutes a few times a week is going to get us to the point where we're going to help with cardiovascular health. We're going to help with mental and emotional health. And
Wait,
so when
stop. I don't want that one to get lost. That's a really big thing. So how many minutes, how many times a week makes a difference?
10 to 15 minutes, 3 times a week. It's not much. Now, this depends on the person's goals. If they're going to performance improvement, then you're going to need more. You're going to have interval training, all the things. But I'm talking for most people who are just looking to improve health, move their body, get into consistent routine. Something is going to be better than nothing. I'm going to point people to a wonderful unsiloed research, a cumulative research study done by Dr. Mike Evans. He's a preventative medical specialist. He did a YouTube video in 2011. And when I first saw this, it made my jaw drop, and I'm immersed in this world. But the research that he compiled was done in Harvard. It was also done with a broad spectrum around nurse health. Nurses and teachers are worked to death. They're undervalued, underpaid, and so their pockets of time for self-care is very limited. But so he did this. He compiled the research that showed the impact on a mental, emotional, and physical level on walking 30 minutes a day. Not all at once. So it didn't have to be 30 and you're done, but it was like, it could be 10 in the morning, like walking a dog, 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, 10 in the evening. And it looked at the positive impact on cardiovascular health, mind-blowing. And all you have to do is Google 23 and a half hours and it'll pop up the video, but it's like 10 minutes and it's really well done. It's entertaining to watch. But also, of course, what I was most interested in at the time was, okay, mental, emotional. It decreased on average, for those who walked on average 30 minutes a day, it decreased anxiety by up to 47%. That was the average. It decreased depression by up to 32%. And when that variable was increased from 30 minutes to 60 minutes, it decreased depression by 48%. That's tremendous. So movement is powerful. And yet if we feel like I got to hurt myself, I got to, really like the boot camp kind of approaches. And again, that works for some people. I find for most, it's a negative reinforcement. It's like touching a hot stove. We may do it once, maybe twice, but we're going to quickly learn to not keep touching that hot stove. So when we have a negative reinforcement to movement, we're not going to do it. So this study is powerful because walking, but it could be any movement. It could be swimming. It could be biking. It could be anything dancing. It's something that's just moving the body, bringing the heart rate up just a little bit. And that is going to have a powerful impact on ourselves holistically. And again, going back to that statement, when we feel better, mentally and emotionally, we make better self-care choices. When we don't feel good, when we're in survival mode, we make survival mode choices. And so this is where you want to shift what's happening internally, and that really can impact, it's a domino effect to other choices. So it's powerful, impactful.
Yeah. Do you know anybody who has ever gone through one boot camp that goes through the second?
I did it for years. I did it for years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did boot camp.
What made you stop?
Injury.
Oh, well.
An injury made me stop, and then I didn't get back in it. But for that period in my life, it was super fulfilling.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't feeling strong. And when I say strong, I'm going to tell you that was emotionally strong.
No.
And by building up my physical endurance, and I did some like I say competition, but it wasn't like I was competing for some prize. It was just challenges. I was doing some competitive challenges, competing against myself. And the effect that had on me in all aspects of my life was I was just shocked. And I was so proud of myself because I was doing things that I never had tried and I had never seen me do. It had such a profound impact on me. And I realized then the importance of physical strength and health on every other thing in my life, and confidence, not only just the, my wellness element, but confidence, my self-love. And I like what you just said, Erin, about when you're making decisions in survival mode, you are, what did you say? At least there's survival choices, but when we feel better, we make better choices with our self-care.
Well, I know that when I don't exercise, I don't feel well. I don't feel happy. And so when bad things happen, I know the first thing I have to do is go out and do something physical. It's a natural thing. I got in the habit of it years and years ago. It's, I'm usually doing 2 or 3 different things in a day. Most people aren't like that. Most people, it's a chore. And so when people say, oh, I can't do it, how am I going to discipline myself? I'm like, get a dog, because the dog has to be walked, right? But how do you get people to make that change? And what's the way to keep them to keep doing it?
It's like they wait to feel motivated. So whenever you don't have the motivation to get started, how do you circumvent that?
Very good question. And it's really about, when it comes to keeping your mojo, I mean, it's easy to lose our mojo. Life happens. And you mentioned an injury that maybe took you off what you love to do and what really filled you up from the inside out and outside in. It just, that sense of empowerment from accomplishment and achievement is powerful, as you experienced, and you found your fitness style for a time, And when we're, for whatever reason, when we lose our mojo and our motivation, or we just can't do the thing that we're used to doing, the key is to, sometimes we just need to pivot and adapt and do different. But when it's just motivation's waning and we're like, okay, I know what to do. I often hear this, Erin, I know what to do. I know how to do it. I know all the things. I mean, at these immersion wellness resorts, I'd often have people say, like, I could teach these classes. I know exactly what to eat, what to do. I'm just not doing it. So when we're faced against that, how to bridge that gap between insight and action, it's really about digging deeper into, well, why do I want to create change in the first place? This is where the pain, what is it? I think it's a Tony Robbins quote, but it's like, a pain of staying the same needs to outweigh the pain of change. And also looking at, well, what's motivating the desire to change in the first place? We want to look at our why. Okay, often we know what we want to accomplish. Maybe we have the how, even though we're not doing it. Maybe we don't have the how, we need to learn it and work with someone to help us with fine-tuning that. But the why is the intrinsic motivation for wanting to create that change in the first place. I want to use an example that I would often hear of. So, and I still do in my own practice now, is like, Erin, I want to lose weight. I don't feel comfortable in my body, and I need to lose weight. And my doctor's telling me, and so they're getting it from family, getting it from medical, and their own inner voice. And so the motivation is there, but to an extent, but those are extrinsic motivators from other people, from a doctor, from a family member, a well-meaning family member. It could be from numbers that they're getting from a blood lipid profile test. It could be, so then it becomes, well, why do you, I would often ask in a class I would teach at Hilton Head, that was, okay, what's your goal? And why is that goal there? What will happen when you achieve that goal? And so it kind of helps people to trail back to their own intrinsic motivator for wanting to create change. So for example, if someone wants to lose weight, well, why do you want to lose weight? What's that going to bring to your life? Well, I can fit in my clothes. Okay, what will that bring? And so, well, I'll feel more confident. Okay, and what will that bring? And so, and I think it's really about, well, I'll be able to, maybe put myself out there more. But this is where it gets a little tricky, because sometimes you're like, well, I'm going to put certain parts of my life on hold until I reach that goal. And that's where the psychology comes in of, okay, what is a deeper, more intrinsic reason of, well, it's usually a quality of life reason that person wants to create change. And if they can't get to the intrinsic motivator, the extrinsic motivator, such as a number on a scale, might help to catalyze action, but it's not going to be sustainable. And this is where the research shows we have to have that quality of life reason to anchor into when our motivation starts to wane. I want to have less pain in my body. I want to have more energy. I want to be able to get on the floor and play with my grandkids. I want to be able to travel around the world and walk without pain. So these become more the quality of life reasons that people might be able to anchor into when that motivation starts to wane. The extrinsic motivators can help. It's going to have a shorter shelf life.
There was a woman at Hilton Head who was in her 80s and quite obese. I'm sure you know who this is. And I said, well, why are you here? And she says, I want to be able to pick up my great-granddaughter. And right there you have it.
Well, and I know what's interesting is it's not always so obvious. And I like the conversation you were having, Erin, about asking kind of the 5 why questions or whatever. And I know similar similar experience I had with someone I was working with. We were talking about a completely different topic. And in it, she mentioned, losing weight because it was driving a lot of burnout in her job. And so she was talking about stress of being overweight and wanting to lose it. And through that conversation, we were getting down to the why. And what the story that eventually came up was she had gone on vacation with her husband, like to a resort. And and they had a healthy marriage, they had a good marriage, but she noticed him looking at healthier women, right? Just noticing the women at the pool or just looking, not disrespectful, subtle, but it was this moment of, I want him to look at me that way. And I feel like my marriage is at risk. So all of this stress and burnout, like once it came down to it, was really about reconnecting with her spouse, right? And so that was her why, but it was this sort of convoluted way to figure out how to get there and unpack that it was about intimacy in her relationship. And she missed it because, you get stale in a marriage, things get stale. So how do you start spicing it up? And then what was cool is she found that it was less about the number on the scale and more about the things they were doing together to connect.
Yes.
To connect in a more intimate way.
When you look at long term with people, what is it that you think has been the driving force that has kept people to remain successful?
Good question. It's one is knowing their why and returning back to their why as far as why, because this change is not easy. It requires pushing the envelope of our comfort zone. We have to let go of things that we maybe minimize some of those things, like certain food choices that are, we have to bring in rituals of self-care that in the beginning feels, difficult and challenging because we're creating new habits. The other one is really being aware of how we're measuring success along the way. And, even the word success is a loaded word. How are we measuring and defining it? And so again, within the weight loss industry and health, optimally, we're just striving for health rather than the pursuit of weight loss. The research shows that when we're pursuing weight loss, usually the desperate thoughts lead to desperate measures. We're going to grasp onto the quick, what is marketed as the quick fix, which ends up being the detour, not the shortcut we hope it'll be. And it draws people in. But the lifestyle way, the moving toward health and longevity and vitality and empowerment and strength, it feels this way. One is I need to fix myself, and the other is I choose to care for myself. Those are very different mindsets. And when we're choosing, I need to care for myself, I choose to care for myself, what it does is it opens up a broader way to measure, well, how am I noticing that I'm aligning with my own self-care? I'm going to quote Bob Wright, who is the director of education at Hilton Head. He would always say, weight follows behavior, but not right away. So if we can just not to discount, look, this is individual. If someone has a weight loss goal, that is very personal and that is theirs. But when it becomes the tunnel vision, that's where it gets tricky. We want to have it, maybe if it's right for that person, have it be a piece of that puzzle, again, very personal. But the key is to have most of the puzzle pieces, the self-care piece. What am I doing behaviorally? How am I aligning with the self-care? And then how am I measuring that I'm moving the needle toward where I want to go? Not just the number on the scale, if that's part of the person's goal, but again, vitality, mental, emotional, physical health and well-being. So there's a measuring success checklist that I created when I was there. And it was really about how people could note that after a week of their stay. They may be there, usually they are keeping track with the number, the data, the number on the scale, but it was also looking at, okay, how do I feel different? What can I do that I couldn't do a week ago? What are my, we would take blood sugar and the blood sugar would be coming down within a matter of a few days. People would have to change their insulin if they have type 2 diabetes because of the impact of movement and healthy eating. It was just powerful. That's motivating. They felt more energized. They maybe had less food thoughts and cravings. I did a lot of work with women and men around relationship with food, emotional overeating, binge eating, compulsive overeating. So I would hear a lot from that angle of, wow, this isn't here as much anymore. It's kind of in the background and it's maybe a little hum, but really I'm feeling so good and so energized and connected people within this common mission of healthy living that this just feels really good. And it was such a transformative impact on overall well-being. So it's really looking at mentally, emotionally, physically, what are the other changes someone is seeing and noticing in their body, but then also mentally and emotionally. It's key because it helps us to just take that pressure off of a data point and bring it to overall well-being. Because again, when we feel better, we make better self-care choices. So even though it can be challenging at times if there's that desperation and urgency kind of at play, but that helps to keep perspective along a path that is slow and steady. It's not fast and furious. It's over the long haul.
Do you think that it seems to me that the most painful part of that process is when you, and you quoted Bob on that, when you should lose weight, but you gain. So then it's like, screw it, I'm done.
Now, why am I doing this? What's the point? But this is where it's tricky with weight loss and gain. So I've worked at resorts where they, they have, it's weight loss and scale is it's a controversial topic, and especially in the eating disorder field. And so I'm going to tread lightly here, but when it comes to these retreats where, people come because that's a part of what their goal is. And for some people, it is the goal. As my work as a health, specialist in health psychology, and especially eating and exercise psychology, I would never want to discount that person's goal. But yet I'm not going to join hands and walk alongside them through that tunnel. But how can I point almost like shine a light over here as well when it comes to this sense of providing the research and the evidence around even the metabolic basis of weight loss and weight gain? It is non-linear. It's non-linear. It's going to ebb and flow each day, even different times during the day. So when someone's weighing themselves daily, they can probably get a better snapshot of that. Just, hey, they're doing everything quote unquote right. But the body is, it's ever changing. There's water retention. What do we eat the night before? There's also, especially for women, there's hormonal fluctuations that's going to impact our body weight. And that's in all stages, perimenopause, menopause, post. So this is where it's not a black and white scenario. And it's going to be ever changing. How do we take that data point and have perspective? When we feel like there's a continual up, despite doing everything quote unquote right, then that's where it's about talking to health professionals around bringing them in to kind of evaluate, what are you doing? How are you doing? How are you approaching it? I want to use an example that I would often see, overly restrictive eating. So the body's not getting enough calories to some extent that people will lose, but then the body's going to hold, especially if it's the umpteenth diet they've been on, then the body's really going to hold on. Because it's like, oh, you're fasting again? We're not going to let go of anything. And so physiologically, it becomes a conditioned response by the body to hold on to what it feels like is energy. So this is where, we can't ignore the physiology around, again, the metabolic basis of weight loss and weight gain and the holistic impact on that. When we're stressed out, and I worked with a lot of stressed out executives over the years and was a former recovered executive myself, so I get it, where you're working 80 plus hours a week and time for self-care is minimized, stress is off the charts, let alone maybe a personal life that's coming into play. And when we're having that fight or flight stress response in the system, our body's releasing cortisol and adrenaline at levels that our body was not meant to handle on a chronic basis. Hello, weight gain, especially in the belly area. And so there's also other hormones at play that can impact the gain or the loss. So this is where it requires a holistic perspective. It's not just about calories in, calories out, although that is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the entire picture. So this is where getting support is crucial so that we can have a sounding board with someone who is educated, experienced, understands the research. That's very important, but then also understands that we don't all fit in a bell curve. So we have research, there's a mean, but there's outliers, and we have to respect that there's still going to be individual responses. So how can we take the research, but then also the best research of all is our own body and our own response, our own mental and emotional response. We have to take all of that into account before writing something off as we move forward in this process. So this is where tweaking it and making it our own is required. It helps us to become our own authority around our health and wellness, but it is a process of tuning in.
So,
How do
question?
you define wellness when you pull weight loss out of that? What else is it?
That's a good question. Wellness. For me, I define it as just mental, emotional, physical. I look at the health psychology definition, which is the inner and outer influences on wellness and well-being, mental, emotional, physical, social. Social is important, especially since COVID. You know, I do a lot of work and have before COVID and since for sure around the loneliness, the impact of loneliness and isolation. And so that's such an important part, and something I'm very passionate about is really shining a light on the loneliness epidemic that became even more of an epidemic when we were mandated into isolation. But the social well-being piece is key, and then also the spiritual. And by spiritual well-being, I'm talking about the connection to self. So it could be when we're feeling spiritually hungry or deprived, it's really about feeling deprived of a sense of purpose, passion, pleasure, joy, connection to self, and or connection to others. So it could be one or more of those things where we just feel like there's a void, there's something missing, off. And that can be, I find in my work, especially with relationship with food, spiritual hunger is often at the foundation. It's like something's just not right, and I can't put my finger on it. There's also emotional eating and emotional hunger. There's actually physical hunger, you know, all the other hungers. But the spiritual one is a part of well-being that is really about that connection to self and connection to others. We're hardwired for that, but many are struggling with that. So it's kind of all of those things under that umbrella that, as in my work, I'm always looking at holistically with folks and how to help people to understand, well, what is my well-being wheel or my wellness wheel, and what are some of the pieces that might be missing, and what is actually feeling like it's in a place of thriving.
Yeah, earlier, you mentioned something earlier I want to dig into. You mentioned that based on where you gain weight could be an indication of kind of what's going on. Can you dig into a little bit of where we noticed ourselves putting on weight and what that may, you know, how to tune into that so maybe we think about it differently, what our behaviors are?
Yeah, I think too, this is where it's going to depend on the person. It depends on body type. And to go back to the research, when we're high stress, that's where the cortisol production is happening at a higher rate in the body. And usually that ends up in adipose tissue in the belly. Also for women, when they're going through perimenopause and menopause, you know, that's again where estrogen is coming. Again, I'm not an expert, so this is from research, so I'm not a doctor. But this is where when estrogen is coming down primarily, then that's where we're going to maybe have more deposits of fat in the belly as well. So all of this can be managed through stress management techniques, and, you know, it can be managed through, you know, working with a doctor around menopausal, perimenopausal change. So that's one thing. And of course, I'm working primarily with women. So that's something that I'm well versed on. But when it comes to weight gain and where someone might gain, it's really going to rely most heavily on their body type and what they're doing or not doing in the vein of movement and self-care and stress management and eating nourishing foods. So this is where it becomes also quite individual.
It does. I have a follow-on. Fitness style changes. So we talked earlier about, you know, for a while I did boot camp. That was great. And then there was another period in my life where I was super stressed out and I didn't want to do anything that was intense. I only wanted to do breathing or yoga, like slow, long movements. How do we know when it's time for a change in what our go-to exercise tactics are?
First of all, I love hearing that you were able to tune in and back off from the intensity. I would see this a lot with stressed out people where their stress was so sky high that they would go and do high intensity exercise, which literally added stress to stress. But it felt like that was needed. So the fact that you tuned in and were able to just back off and go to more mindful and slow and rhythmic, that's exactly what the body needed, but we don't always know that. So if in that sense of shifting, when to shift gears, sometimes it's decided for us if we have an illness or an injury. When COVID hit, we couldn't go to the gym, so that was decided for us in a different way. But it's really about, this is where that process of tuning in and paying attention and asking ourselves, do I enjoy this, or am I doing this because I feel like I have to? that is key. It's really asking the question of, is this a means to an end? And sometimes a means to an end is okay if it's consistent and sustainable for that person. Other times it's, again, that hot stove analogy, like, yeah, I do this for a week or two and I'm out. Well, that's usually an indicator that's no longer a fitness style. So what can be sustainable? And usually it requires a process of exploration. This is what's cool about these health retreats is they have such a wide variety of wellness and fitness classes that you can experiment to find your fitness style and rule out what is a means to an end versus what is enjoyable, pleasurable, feels good in the body, or at least is tolerated more, that feels more sustainable. But I think it's, as you kind of used in your example, it's really about assessing, evaluating what's working, what's not working. And by working, I mean feeling good, allowing for consistency, rather than no pain, no gain, fast and furious. Sometimes that has its place. I'm with you. I like to push my body and I do that. But there's also seasons where I'm like, okay, my body needs to take a freaking break. So I got a break. And that's part of it, is really about how do we align with what's going to really serve us in the long haul, not just in the moment. So it's key to just tune in.
So could you tell our listeners, if you just to get going for 1 week, if you did these X, Y, and Z, you will feel like a new person within 1 week. What things would be on that list?
Yeah, I would say start moving. Something's going to be better than nothing. It's going to be even a 5-minute walk, swim, bike, whatever it is that feels good for that person. It could be chair yoga, if you can't move with the lower body. Something that really helps to get the blood pumping, and a little will go a long way. The other one is, tuning into, it's really easy to get stuck in survival mode and autopilot mode. So really tuning into what makes me laugh? What do I enjoy? What brings pleasure? And I'm talking about the inside out pleasure. And sometimes we're so far removed from that, we just I don't even know anymore. But what did I used to do that I'm not doing anymore? Can I experiment with that first? So it's asking that, again, going back to when we feel better, we make better self-care choices. So it's tuning into what makes me come alive, rather than feel like I'm in survival mode. And also the physiological part of how can I move my body in a way that's gentle and can allow for consistency and that feels manageable. Those are two things. And then honestly, the support piece, we have again, like I said earlier, an epidemic of going solo. I work with a lot of people who have I got this, I don't want to burden, they're used to being there for others, but they don't allow it in. That takes a toll. And so it's really also about how do we allow the support in? How do we allow the good into our own lives? That's another, and it can feel like a loaded, I don't even know where to start with that. But this is where counseling, coaching, a friend, reaching out to someone we haven't contacted in a while, how can we start titrating that back into our lives in a way that feels manageable? That's key. So those are the 3 things that I would highlight.
That's awesome, Erin. You've given us just a different perspective in how to think about our overall wellness. And I appreciate just you sharing the stories. There were a few things that I know really resonated with me that I wanted to just repeat back for our listeners as healthy practices as you go on this journey, right? One is just tuning into what feels right for you. It is not one size fits all. That could look a lot of different ways. Tune into whatever feels right. And the power of just 10 to 15 minutes, how and the impact that it can have 3 times a week on your overall mental and cardio health. The fact that movement is powerful. So don't underestimate it. And I think the stats that you shared earlier that I just mentioned are just a testament to that. I love the fact that you said when we feel better, we make better choices. Good reminder. And then remember that success is measured beyond the numbers on the scale, and to broaden your perspective of that and look at how are you feeling? Where do you have joy? What are some of the other indicators in your overall happiness versus it being just about the weight? And thank you for just the go-dos to try over the week and take the time to reflect on how you're feeling and what changes you're noticing so that you can get some signs of what is heading me in the right direction so I can keep doing them over time and reap all the wonderful benefits from that. So thank you so much.
Now, tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you so that if they want you to be their therapist or guide or guru, they've got that. And when are you going to finish that book?
Oh man, I'm working on it. Well, you're my inspiration, Fawn. So I can be reached at erinrisius.com. So it's ErinRisius.com. It's a lot of vowels in my lane, but that's probably the best way to reach me. A lot of info on there. And I'll be getting some blog stuff on there and free resources too in time. So
the checklist, I'm interested in your checklist you mentioned.
Yeah. No, I'll be having that on there soon too. So,
well, thank you for being with us. I know I'm going to rope you into doing this again. You are amazing. And people should know one of the things I love so much about Erin was that the first time we met, she's trying to figure out how to help me be more successful. She is so supportive of other women. That's her passion. That's her legacy. So she's someone that I highly recommend. And I'm so glad to see you on the other side of this Zoom camera. So have a great day. And everybody, we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining the Hard Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.